Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that will take you on a journey of love, betrayal, and the courage it takes to choose yourself. This is the story of Lauren, a woman who stayed silent for years, endured heartbreak, and finally discovered that walking away was not failure, but survival. It's about the hidden truths that can destroy a marriage, the lessons we inherit from family, and the power of reclaiming your life. So let's start. The morning Lauren Walker left her marriage, there was no drama. No tears stained her face, no doors were slammed, no voices were raised. She did not wait for explanations or apologies. She simply folded her clothes with care, placed them into a small cardboard box, and walked out of the house before her husband returned. Later, people would be shocked, not that she left, but by the reason she did. Because to everyone else, Lauren had married the perfect man. Ethan Walker was admired by neighbors, praised by relatives, and respected by co-workers. He was known as a devoted son, a protective brother, a man who never turned his back on family. People said he had a good heart. People said Lauren was lucky. What no one saw was how that same devotion slowly drained the life out of his wife. No one noticed how Lauren disappeared quietly inside her own marriage. And no one, not even Lauren herself, knew that the truth waiting ahead would dismantle everything they believed about love, loyalty, sacrifice, and family. 8 hours before she walked out of that house for the last time, Lauren stood alone in the kitchen, staring at a pot of soup resting on the stove. The burner was still on. The soup had gone cold. She had forgotten about it. Her phone vibrated on the counter, a text from Ethan. "I won't be home early, Mom needs me." Lauren read it once, then again. She turned the phone face down and let out a quiet laugh, not because the message was funny, but because it was expected, predictable, familiar. She turned off the stove and slowly lowered herself to the kitchen floor, leaning her back against the cabinets. Her breathing became slow and deliberate, like someone trying to stay calm while sinking underwater. This had become her life. Waiting, understanding, adjusting, excusing, shrinking herself, all in the name of love. When Lauren married Ethan 8 years earlier, she believed love meant compromise and sacrifice. She never imagined it would require erasing herself. Ethan was everything people admired in a man. Gentle, in public, hardworking, respectful. The kind of man parents hoped their daughters would marry. On their wedding day, Ethan's mother, Margaret Walker, embraced Lauren tightly and whispered, "I suffered greatly to raise this boy. He is all I have." Lauren had smiled then, touched by the words. "I'll take good care of him," she replied. She didn't know she had just made a promise that would cost her everything. The first year of marriage felt warm and hopeful. Ethan called during his lunch breaks. They laughed about small things. They talked about children, a bigger home, a future that felt close and possible. But Ethan also called his mother every morning. At first, Lauren admired it. "He's a good son," she told herself. Then the requests began. Small ones at first. "Mom needs money for medication. My sister's tuition is short this month. My brother just needs help until he finds work." Every time Ethan said the same thing. "Family comes first." Lauren agreed. Every time. The problem wasn't that Ethan helped his family. The problem was that he never paused. He never discussed it. He never considered the cost. Money left their home like water through an open drain. Lauren began stretching grocery budgets and counting coins, while Ethan sent transfers without hesitation. When she gently raised concerns, Ethan sighed heavily. "Why do women always focus on money?" he asked once. She stopped bringing it up. When Ethan's younger brother moved in for a few weeks, Lauren welcomed him warmly. She cooked, she cleaned, she adjusted. Weeks turned into months. When she finally spoke up, Ethan's patience snapped. "Why does everything have to be an issue?" he said sharply. "He's my brother." That night, Lauren cried silently beside him while he slept. The day she lost her pregnancy was the day something inside her fractured completely. She sat alone in a hospital bed, staring at the pale walls while nurses moved quietly around her. Her phone lay silent beside her. Ethan wasn't there. He was at his mother's house, repairing a leaking roof. "I'm sorry," he said when she called. "Mom is old. I couldn't leave her." Lauren stared at the ceiling and nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She simply stopped hoping. Years passed. Friends noticed the change. "You've gotten so quiet," one of them said. Lauren smiled politely. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. She felt hollow. Ethan mistook her silence for maturity. "At least she understands now," he told people. At home, Lauren began saving small amounts of money from her tailoring work, just a little at a time, quietly. She didn't know what she was preparing for. She only knew she needed an exit. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. They were supposed to attend her cousin's wedding together. Lauren borrowed a dress and stood before the mirror, forcing enthusiasm she didn't feel. Ethan entered the room, already dressed. "Mom just called," he said casually. "My sister's child is sick." Lauren swallowed. "We can stop by after the wedding," she said carefully. "It won't take long." Ethan frowned. "Why are you acting like this?" "Like what?" she asked. "Like you're competing with my family." Her chest tightened. "I'm not competing," she said softly. "I'm your wife." Ethan laughed, not cruelly, just dismissively. "You're too emotional." He walked out. Lauren sat on the bed in silence. In that moment, she understood something clearly. Not that her marriage was struggling, but that it had already ended. That night, Ethan returned late. He didn't notice the packed box hidden under the bed. He didn't notice the calm in Lauren's eyes. He didn't notice that she had already let go. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Margaret Walker had been hiding a truth for decades. A truth that would soon surface. A truth that would explain everything. A truth that would shatter Ethan completely. And when Lauren walked out of the house the next morning, she wasn't running away from her husband. She was walking toward her survival. Lauren left the house just after sunrise. The streets were quiet, washed in soft gold light. The kind of quiet that made every footstep echo in your mind. She carried only a small box in her hands, nothing else. No luggage, no notes, no arguments. She didn't look back. If she did, she might hesitate. And she could not afford to hesitate. Ethan returned home that evening, exhausted but satisfied with his day. He had run errands for his mother, bought her medications, repaired the broken window, and delivered groceries. He opened the front door with a smile. "Lauren, I'm home!" he called. No answer. He placed his keys on the counter and walked into the bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, too perfectly. That's when he noticed the wardrobe, empty. "Lauren?" His voice rose. His pulse quickened. In the dining room, an envelope lay neatly on the table. His hands shook as he picked it up. Inside was a single typed letter. The tone was calm, eerily calm. "Ethan, I have tried. I stayed longer than I should have. I waited, I hoped, I endured. I am not leaving because you are a bad man. I am leaving because I am no longer alive inside this marriage. Do not look for me until you are ready to hear the truth." He sank into a chair. Confusion, disbelief, and anger collided inside him. How could she leave like this, after everything? Fear followed quickly. What would people say? What would his mother say? He dialed Margaret's number without thinking. "Mom," he said, his voice tense. "Lauren, she's left the house." There was a pause, a long one. "Left?" Margaret said slowly. "Left how?" She packed her things and left. She didn't even argue. Another pause, then her voice was soft, trembling. "Come to the house, we need to talk." Ethan's stomach dropped. Margaret Walker rarely ever said that. "We need to talk" was never casual. Something was wrong. Meanwhile, Lauren sat quietly in the small guest room at her friend Hannah's house. Hannah observed her, unsure what to say. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Lauren nodded. "I am tired." Hannah reached for her hand. "What happened?" Lauren stared at the wall, then gave a bitter laugh. "Nothing," she said. "That's the problem. Nothing ever happened. And everything broke me anyway." Back at Margaret's house, Ethan sat on the edge of the sofa, tense and uneasy. Margaret poured tea into delicate cups, her hands shaking slightly. "You know," she began. When your father died, everything fell on me. Ethan nodded. I suffered, she continued. I begged, I cried, I sacrificed. I know you think I pushed too much, but I did what I had to do. Ethan grew impatient. I know, Mom. You suffered. But what is this about? Margaret looked into her tea. Do you really know? What do you mean? Ethan asked, his heart pounding. When you were growing up, I told you to always put family first, she said. I taught you that loyalty was sacred, that you must protect us. I knew what it was doing to your wife. Ethan froze. You knew. She nodded slowly. She came to me, many times. She begged me to speak to you, to make you see. But I told her to endure. Ethan's chest tightened. You told her to endure? She is a woman, Margaret whispered. That is what women do. Something inside him twisted, a cold, burning realization. His mother had watched his marriage crumble and had done nothing, no worse. She had encouraged the silence, the pain, the endurance. Margaret opened her mouth to speak again, but her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and stiffened. Who is that? Ethan asked. No one, she said too quickly. Ethan reached for the phone. Mom, leave it, she snapped. Ethan stared at her, stunned. In all his life, Margaret had never spoken to him like that. Something was very, very wrong. That night, Ethan could not sleep. His mother's words echoed endlessly. I told her to endure. For the first time, he wondered how many cries he had ignored, how many times he had mistaken silence for peace. The next morning, Lauren received a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but instinct pushed her to answer. Hello? She said. Lauren, said a calm, serious voice. This is Margaret Walker. Lauren closed her eyes. Yes, Mom. I need to see you. There are things you need to know, Margaret said. Lauren hesitated. I'm tired, Mom. I know. But this concerns why your marriage could never survive, Margaret replied softly. Lauren's heart raced. What do you mean? Margaret swallowed, steadying herself. There is something about Ethan's father. Something I hid from everyone. Something that shaped the man you married. How he treats women. How he controls. How he expects. It all started there. Lauren's breath caught. What did you hide, Mom? Her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret answered. Ethan is not who you think he is. The line went dead. Lauren stared at the phone, trembling. Across town, Ethan stood outside his mother's room, listening to her cry quietly inside. For the first time, both husband and wife stood on opposite sides of the same truth. Truths they had never fully understood. Truths that would dismantle more than a marriage. Lauren did not sleep that night. Margaret's words replayed like a drum in her mind. Ethan is not who you think he is. Every memory of her marriage began to realign itself. Puzzle pieces she had forced into the wrong shape for years finally snapping into place. By morning, she knew one thing. He had to hear the truth. That afternoon, Lauren arrived at Margaret's house. She almost turned back at the gate. The house looked familiar, quiet, heavy with memories. But her legs carried her forward before fear could stop her. Margaret was smaller than she remembered. Older, tired. Ethan was not there. That surprised her. You came, Margaret said quietly. Lauren nodded. You said I needed to know something. Margaret gestured to the living room, her hands shaking as she folded them together. For years, she began slowly, I was afraid of this moment. Lauren waited. When I married Ethan's father, Margaret said, I believed I was lucky. He was respected, admired. People spoke well of him, but inside our home, he was different, controlling, cold. If the food was late, if I spoke too much, if I showed weakness, he punished me, silently, with indifference. I learned to endure, but it took everything from me. Lauren felt a chill. She recognized that same control now in Ethan. Blindly, completely, Margaret continued. And when he became a man, he learned what he saw. A woman's role is to endure. That is why. When you complained, Ethan never heard you. He only heard disobedience. Lauren's heart ached. But why push him to choose me over you? She asked softly. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. Because I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid that if he loved you fully, he might abandon me emotionally, like his father abandoned me. Lauren stared at her. So you sacrificed me, she whispered. Margaret bowed her head. Yes. The words hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside, Ethan sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel. He had heard everything, every word, every confession. His world was unraveling. Inside, Lauren stood tall. I loved your son, she said quietly. I still care for him, but love is not meant to erase someone. Margaret nodded, weeping. I know, she whispered. A file lay on the table. Margaret pushed it toward Lauren. What is this? Lauren asked. Proof, Margaret said softly, of the lies I've lived with and the lies that shaped Ethan. Lauren opened the file with trembling hands. Hospital records. Letters. Diagnoses. Every detail revealed a hidden past. Her heart pounded. What does this mean? Margaret's voice cracked. Ethan's father did not die naturally. He took his own life, unable to live with the man he had become. Before he died, he told me one thing. If Ethan ever learned the truth, it would destroy him. So I raised him to never question, to always protect, to never look too closely. Lauren closed the file slowly. Everything made sense now. The control, the guilt, the misplaced loyalty, the silence. The door opened. Ethan walked in. Both women turned to him. His face was pale. I heard everything, he said hoarsely. Margaret gasped. Ethan raised a hand. No, Mom, please! He turned to Lauren. I'm sorry, he said, voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing. Lauren studied him silently. I know, she said gently. That's what makes it so painful. He stepped closer. Can we fix this? Lauren shook her head slowly. Some things, she said, are not broken. They are finished. Ethan collapsed into a chair. Margaret wept openly. Days passed. News spread. Some blamed Lauren, some admired her courage. Ethan began therapy, unlearning the lessons that had ruined his marriage. Margaret fell ill shortly afterward. Loneliness finally caught up with her. Lauren visited once, not out of duty but for closure. Months later, in her own apartment, Lauren smiled freely. She hadn't remarried. She wasn't rushing. She was alive. Life after leaving had begun to settle for Lauren, though not in the way she expected. She now lived in a modest apartment on the quieter side of town, small but orderly, with sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors in the morning. For the first time in years, she woke without hesitation, ate when she was hungry, and slept without the weight of footsteps or the tense expectation of someone else's return. But even in this calm, the echoes of the past lingered. Messages, memories, and the secret she had just uncovered haunted her mind. She understood, more vividly than ever, that survival required more than walking away. It required confronting the truth she had long avoided, and soon that truth would arrive in a form she had never anticipated. One rainy evening, as soft drops tapped against her window, an unfamiliar number flashed on her phone. Lauren hesitated, almost ignoring it. But instinct, that quiet inner voice she had learned to trust, compelled her to answer. Hello? Lauren? Said a serious, measured voice. This is Dr. Martin. Lauren froze. The name sent a shiver down her spine. Dr. Martin had been the physician who treated her the day she lost her first pregnancy. Her hands trembled as she replied, Yes, Dr. Martin. What is this about? The doctor took a deep breath. It's about something I should have told you years ago. Something you need to know now. Lauren's chest tightened. She nodded, even though he could not see her. Please, tell me. The next afternoon, they met at a quiet cafe. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and fresh. Dr. Martin looked older than she remembered, heavier with the weight of years and regret. I've carried this for a long time, he said quietly, stirring his tea. When I heard you left your marriage, I realized I could no longer stay silent. Lauren leaned forward. What do I need to know? He exhaled slowly. The miscarriage you experienced, the one you went through alone, was not entirely natural. Lauren froze, gripping the edge of the table. What do you mean? Your body was under extreme stress, Dr. Martin explained. Prolonged emotional neglect, psychological trauma, lack of support. It can cause physiological damage. Your pregnancies were at risk long before the hospital visits. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. But I thought it was just bad luck. There's more, Dr. Martin continued gently. You were pregnant again, a second time, within weeks of the first. And you lost that as well. The words struck her like a lightning bolt. No, she whispered. That's impossible. You weren't aware, he said softly. The losses happened quickly, and the emotional weight made it nearly impossible to process at the time. Lauren's hands shook violently. So, all of it. It wasn't just me, it was the environment, the marriage. Dr. Martin nodded. Yes, if you had remained in that household, the continued stress could have cost your life. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped her lips. Support, she muttered, her voice cracking. That's what I never had. Support. Dr. Martin looked at her with profound sadness. Leaving didn't just save your happiness, Lauren. It saved your life. Silence swallowed the table. Lauren took a deep, shuddering breath and realized for the first time that she had survived more than heartbreak. She had survived trauma, neglect, and the near destruction of her body. That night, she allowed herself to cry. Not just for herself, but for the children she never held. And for the first time, she forgave herself completely. Meanwhile, Ethan's world had begun to unravel in ways he had never imagined. Therapy forced him to confront the lessons he had learned from his mother and the invisible chains of loyalty and obedience she had instilled. He questioned everything. Why he felt guilty for prioritizing himself, why his mother's needs always eclipsed his wife's pain, why silence had seemed like peace. One afternoon, while cleaning old files in his mother's house, Ethan discovered a brown envelope tucked under a cupboard. His name was written on it. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were letters, handwritten letters from his late father. Words he was never meant to read. Ethan, one letter began, "If you are reading this, then I am gone. I was not a good husband. I treated your mother like a duty, not a partner. I see myself in you. If you do not unlearn the lessons I taught, you will destroy the woman you marry and call it responsibility." Ethan's chest tightened. Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he cried like a child, alone in the dim room. The gravity of his father's failures, his mother's manipulations, and his own blind loyalty struck him fully. That evening, Ethan drove to Lauren's apartment without calling ahead. She opened the door and froze. His face was pale, exhausted, and broken in a way she had never seen. "I know now," he said hoarsely. Lauren stepped aside, letting him in. He told her everything, the letters, the regrets, the realization of how deeply he had been shaped by family trauma. Then Lauren told him her truth, the miscarriages, Dr. Martin's warning, how close she had come to losing everything, even her life, within a marriage built on duty and control rather than love. Ethan collapsed to his knees. "I didn't know," he sobbed. "I know," Lauren said gently. "That's the tragedy." 6 months later, Margaret Walker passed away quietly. Not alone, but heavy with regret. Before she died, she asked to see Lauren one last time. Lauren went, not out of obligation, but seeking closure. Margaret grasped her hand weakly. "I stole your life," she whispered. Lauren squeezed her hand gently. "No," she said softly. "You didn't steal it. You showed me how precious it is." Margaret smiled and closed her eyes for the final time. Years later, Lauren stood on a stage at a small women's conference. She shared her story, not to shame anyone, but to free someone, somewhere, who might be trapped and unheard. Looking into the audience, she said, "Love that asks you to disappear is not love. Family that costs you your life is not loyalty. Sometimes walking away is not failure, it is survival." The room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. Ethan stood at the back, changed, humbled, understanding for the first time that some losses cannot return, and that some choices, hard choices, are necessary to survive. Lauren walked off the stage with her head held high. She had not left too early, she had left just in time. The days that followed Lauren's confrontation with Ethan and the revelations from Margaret Walker were heavy with reflection. Lauren spent her mornings sitting by the large window of her apartment, sunlight spilling over her hands as she stitched quietly at her sewing projects. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender, a scent she had chosen herself, something calming, independent, completely hers. Though freedom felt sweet, it was also strange. Every room reminded her of the life she had left behind, a life she had once thought was love. Each stitch she made seemed to carry the weight of lost time, the silent years she had endured, and the children she never held. She knew now that survival was more than leaving. It was about claiming herself fully, without apology. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to understand the depth of his past mistakes. Therapy sessions were grueling. He confronted the patterns his mother had instilled in him. Prioritizing family over marriage. Blind loyalty, control, disguised as love. For the first time, he began to understand why he had ignored Lauren's pain for so long. Every suppressed cry, every silent tear she shed, every moment of endurance, it was all a mirror of the lessons he had learned growing up. One afternoon, Ethan visited the local library, seeking something he could not name. He scanned the shelves, hands trembling slightly, until he came upon a small, forgotten journal tucked behind a row of old law books. It was a diary belonging to his father, written in precise, deliberate handwriting. Page after page revealed a man who had once been capable of love, but had been consumed by pride, fear, and the unyielding rules of family. There were confessions about his mother's dominance, about the control he exerted over his wife, and about how he feared his own failings would destroy the people he cared for. Every line was a lesson, a warning, a mirror of the behavior that Ethan now recognized in himself. That evening, Ethan returned to Lauren's apartment. He did not knock, he did not call ahead. He needed her to see him as he was, not as her husband, but as a man willing to confront the truth and his failures. Lauren opened the door, wary, though the expression on Ethan's face made her pause. The color had drained from his cheeks, his shoulders slumped, heavy with regret. "I've been reading, understanding," he said quietly. "Everything my father wrote, everything I ignored, everything I learned from my mother. I finally see what I've done to you." Lauren studied him silently. She could feel the sincerity in his voice. She could see the years of emotional neglect weighing him down, though it did not erase the past. "I know you're trying," she said softly, "but trying does not undo the years of silence and absence." "I know," he whispered. I need you to know that I understand now. I see what I did, and I see how it hurt you. And I can't ask you to forgive me. Not yet, not fully. But I need you to hear me. I'm sorry. Truly." Lauren's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to run, to preserve the calm she had just begun to build. But another part, an empathetic part, the part that had once loved him deeply, listened. She nodded slowly. "I hear you," she said quietly. "And I know your intentions are finally clear. But clarity doesn't erase consequences. Some things are not meant to be fixed." Ethan swallowed. "I know, but I want to try to be a better man, even if it's too late for us." Lauren looked out the window at the sunset spilling gold and rose across the city skyline. "It's not too late for you," she said gently. "But it's too late for this marriage." The next week, Lauren focused on rebuilding her life more intentionally. She spent her mornings sewing, her afternoons volunteering at a local women's center, and her evenings reading. She began keeping a journal, not to record her pain, but to chart her growth and freedom. Each entry reminded her that survival wasn't just leaving, it was fully embracing herself. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his therapy. He confronted every memory of his childhood, the lessons Margaret had taught, and the toxic patterns his father had passed down. Slowly, painfully, he began to unlearn everything that had destroyed his marriage. He realized the depth of his mother's influence, the ways it had blinded him to Lauren's needs, and the cruelty of expecting endurance from a woman he loved. Yet despite his efforts, He respected Lauren's distance. He did not pressure her, did not intrude on her independence. He waited, learning patience in a way he had never before experienced. One morning, Lauren received a letter in the mail, handwritten, delicate, familiar handwriting. It was from Ethan. "Lauren," it began, "I don't expect anything from you. I only hope you know I am trying to become a man worthy of someone like you, or anyone, for that matter. I understand if you never forgive me. I only wanted you to know that I see my mistakes now. I hope you are finally free." Lauren read the letter twice. A gentle warmth spread through her chest. Not love, not longing, but relief. For the first time, she felt completely untethered from the past. Her phone buzzed shortly afterward, a message from Dr. Martin, checking on her well-being. She replied briefly, smiling softly. Life had become a tapestry of small, deliberate choices. Meals she made for herself, laughter she allowed herself to feel, time she spent untethered by fear or obligation. And somewhere in the background of her life, Ethan's presence became less a shadow and more a reminder of what had been learned, and what no longer needed to hurt her. The weeks that followed Lauren's meeting with Ethan were quieter than she expected. Not in the sense of loneliness, but in the sense of calm. A stillness she had never experienced during the years of her marriage. Her apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where each object, each sound, and each ray of sunlight belonged only to her. Lauren's mornings began with meditation and light stretches by the window. She would breathe deeply, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat, reconnecting with her body and her own presence. Then came the sewing. Every stitch was deliberate, precise, and soothing. She often imagined each thread as a lifeline, weaving together fragments of her lost years into something strong and beautiful. Her afternoons were dedicated to the Women's Center, where she volunteered. Helping others who were trapped in abusive or neglectful situations reminded her of the strength she had found in leaving. Listening to their stories, she gave guidance, not as a moral authority, but as someone who had survived the same silent battles. With each story shared, she became more certain that leaving had not only saved her life, it gave her purpose. One afternoon, a young woman approached her quietly, her eyes wide and fearful. I don't know what to do," the girl whispered. "He doesn't hit me, but I feel like I don't exist in my own home." Lauren smiled softly, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "I know exactly what that feels like," she said gently. "You are not alone, and you are allowed to choose yourself first. It's not easy, but it is the bravest thing you can do." The girl's eyes widened, the first hint of hope flickering in them. Lauren realized then that her past, painful as it was now a tool for helping others. Every scar, every loss, every silent tear had meaning beyond her own suffering. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his journey of understanding. He had begun writing letters to himself, a practice suggested by his therapist. In them, he confronted the habits he had inherited from his parents, prioritizing family over partnership, equating control with love, and ignoring the needs of those closest to him. Ethan's journal was raw, often painful. He wrote about Lauren's miscarriages, about how blind he had been to her suffering, and about the decades of lessons he had absorbed from a mother who demanded loyalty above empathy. Slowly, each word helped him unravel the toxic patterns that had dominated his life. One day, he visited his father's old study, a room filled with the echoes of a man who had once controlled everything around him. Dust coated the shelves, and the letters he had discovered weeks earlier lay untouched on the desk. He opened them again, reading each word carefully, as if trying to extract a map for how to live differently. "I won't repeat this," he whispered to himself. "I will never repeat this with anyone else." Despite the progress, Ethan respected Lauren's boundaries. He no longer tried to intrude on her independence or her time. He simply allowed himself to learn, to reflect, and to grow. He understood that healing for him would never undo the pain Lauren endured, but it could ensure he never caused the same harm again. Meanwhile, Lauren began to explore new parts of herself. She enrolled in evening classes for creative writing, expressing thoughts and emotions she had buried for years. Each paragraph became an act of liberation. She started to write stories inspired by the women she met at the center, weaving in lessons of resilience, courage, and the importance of survival. Her social circle expanded slowly but intentionally. She reconnected with old friends who had seen her struggle and found allies in those who respected her independence. She no longer felt the pressure to justify herself or to explain why she had left Ethan. She simply lived in the fullness of her own choice. One evening, Lauren sat at her window, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. She reflected on the path that had led her here. The pain, the miscarriages, the years of silence, and finally the act of leaving. She realized that every difficult choice she had made had brought her closer to herself. The freedom she now possessed was not a gift from anyone else. It was something she had claimed through courage, patience, and self-love. Outside, Ethan's figure appeared briefly across the street. He had paused during his walk home, looking at her building. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. No words were exchanged, yet in that glance, a silent acknowledgement passed between them. A recognition of past pain, of growth, and of respect for boundaries. Lauren turned away, smiling softly to herself. She no longer carried the weight of expectation or guilt. She was free. And freedom, she realized, was just the beginning. Ethan's journey toward understanding and change became more intense over the following weeks. He found himself revisiting memories from childhood, each one revealing layers of unexamined behaviors he had absorbed from his parents. Margaret's lessons on loyalty, endurance, and obedience now clashed violently with the reality he had witnessed in Lauren's marriage. He began keeping a dedicated journal, separate from therapy notes, where he wrote without censorship. Each entry peeled back another layer of denial. He wrote about his father's obsession with control, his mother's subtle manipulations, and his own silent complicity in the suffering he had inflicted. One evening, he returned to his mother's house. Margaret had fallen asleep in her chair, clutching a blanket close to her frail frame. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but the weight of memories pressed in. Ethan walked into his father's study once more. Dust covered the shelves, letters still lying in disarray. He picked up the envelope and reread the letters from his father. "If you do not unlearn the lessons I taught, you will destroy the woman you marry, and you will call it responsibility." The words struck him harder now than they ever had. He realized that every mistake he had made with Lauren had been a repetition of a cycle he hadn't questioned. His father's legacy had become his own, and now, for the first time, he understood the magnitude of the damage. Determined to break the cycle, Ethan began actively writing letters to himself. Not for Lauren, not for his mother, but for the man he wanted to become. He addressed each past error, each moment of negligence, each time he had ignored a cry for help. In those letters, he promised himself to never allow fear, pride, or misguided loyalty to justify hurting someone again. During this time, he also confronted Margaret directly, something he had avoided for years. One quiet afternoon, he sat with her in the living room, the sun casting long shadows across the wooden floor. "Mom," he began, his voice steady but firm, "I need to understand everything. The way you raised me, the things you allowed and even encouraged, it has consequences. Not just for me, but for everyone I love." Margaret's hands trembled. She had not expected this confrontation, this demand for truth. I did what I thought was best," she whispered. "I wanted loyalty, I wanted protection. I didn't realize—" "You did," Ethan said quietly. "You knew the impact it would have on Lauren. You knew she was suffering, and yet you told her to endure. And I ignored her pain because I thought obedience was love." Margaret lowered her gaze. I'm sorry, Ethan. I tried to do right, but I see now how wrong I was." Ethan nodded, though the anger simmered beneath the surface. Acknowledging it is the first step, but the real work is changing, breaking the cycle. That night, Ethan sat alone in his father's study, reading the letters again. He realized that the man who had caused so much pain, the father, the mother, the system of loyalty above all else, had only left him a map of how not to live. And for the first time, he felt something he had rarely experienced: clarity. In the weeks that followed, he began actively seeking ways to become a better man. He researched healthy relationships, learned about emotional intelligence, and studied ways to be present and supportive without expecting obedience in return. He understood that this process would take years, perhaps a lifetime, but he was determined to break the pattern. He did not try to contact Lauren. He knew that true change required patience and distance. He focused instead on unlearning toxic habits, confronting uncomfortable truths about his upbringing, and redefining his understanding of love and partnership. Meanwhile, Lauren continued building her life. Each day of independence and self-care strengthened her, while Ethan's unseen journey reminded her that healing and growth, for both of them, were separate but parallel paths. By the end of Part 6, both Lauren and Ethan had begun the most important journey, understanding themselves fully, untangling the chains of family expectations, and confronting the shadows that had dictated their lives. One day, their paths would cross again, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had survived, learned, and grown from the pain of the past. It was a cool, quiet afternoon when Lauren received a text from Ethan. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. "I'd like to meet you, just to talk. Nothing more, nothing less." She read it twice, then a third time. For a moment, she felt the old fear stir, a reflex born of years of silence and disappointment. But then she remembered the calm she had built in her apartment, the life she had claimed for herself. This would not be about returning, it would be about clarity. Lauren agreed. They chose a small, neutral cafe, away from the familiar streets of their shared past. The air smelled of fresh coffee and rain-soaked pavement. Lauren arrived first, taking a table near the window, watching the light shift across the empty chairs. When Ethan walked in, he carried himself differently than she remembered. There was no arrogance, no self-righteousness, only a tentative humility and a visible weight of the lessons he had been learning. "Lauren," he began, sitting across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." She nodded, her hands folded calmly on the table. "I'm here. That's enough for now." For a few moments, silence stretched between them, but it was not the oppressive silence of their past. It was quiet, thoughtful, and careful. "I want to start by saying I understand how much I hurt you," Ethan said softly. "Not just in the marriage, but in everything I ignored, everything I failed to see. I've been trying to understand my own behavior, and I see now how blind I was." Lauren studied him. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, the patience behind his words. "You've admitted wrongs before, Ethan. What makes this different?" He took a deep breath. "Because now I've done the work. I've faced my upbringing, my father's legacy, my mother's influence, and I am changing. I'm trying to become a man who will never make the same mistakes again, and I needed you to hear that from me, without expectation." Lauren nodded slowly. "I hear you, and I acknowledge your effort, but understand this. My life isn't about you anymore. It's about me. And while I care about your growth, I will not allow myself to be pulled back into the past. I am not the same woman who stayed silent for years." Ethan nodded, accepting the boundary she set. "I don't expect anything else. I only want you to know, I'm learning, I'm trying, and I am so deeply sorry for everything." Lauren's chest tightened, not with anger, but with the release of long-held tension. For years, she had carried the weight of betrayal, silence, and neglect. Now, hearing his words with honesty and humility, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of relief. "I forgive you," she said softly, "not because it undoes the past, but because I choose to release myself from it. You may never fully understand the pain I endured, and that's okay. But forgiveness frees me, not you." Ethan's eyes glistened with emotion. He nodded silently, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you, Lauren. That means more than you can know." For the first time in years, they sat across from each other without fear, without resentment. Their conversation continued, slow and careful, discussing memories with honesty and acknowledging mistakes with clarity. They did not dwell in blame, they explored lessons. They did not argue over what had been lost. They examined what could be learned. By the end of their meeting, a quiet understanding had formed between them. They were no longer husband and wife, but two people connected by history, pain, and growth. They could coexist in life with mutual respect and acknowledgement, each continuing their journey independently while recognizing the shared lessons of their past. Lauren left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time, the past felt like a chapter she could observe rather than a prison she was trapped in. Ethan, walking behind her for a few steps before turning away, felt the same strange weight lift. The burden of silence, the weight of denial, and the inherited patterns of pain had finally begun to unravel. He understood that change was ongoing, but this conversation marked a pivotal moment. A moment of honesty, humility, and mutual respect. And though the road ahead remained long for both of them, one thing was clear. Acknowledgement and understanding were the first steps toward true healing. Margaret Walker's health had been declining for months, though she had kept it mostly hidden. The frailty of her body contrasted sharply with the influence she had wielded over her family for decades. One quiet afternoon, Lauren received a call from the nursing home where Margaret was staying. "She wishes to see you," the nurse said gently. "It's important to her." Lauren paused, her heart tightening. Part of her hesitated, recalling the years of manipulation and pain. But another part, the part that had grown stronger through survival, recognized the importance of closure. She arrived at the nursing home to find Margaret sitting in a wheelchair, wrapped in a soft blanket, her eyes tired but alert. Lauren approached cautiously, kneeling beside her. "Lauren," Margaret whispered, her voice weak. "Thank you for coming." Lauren took her hand gently. "I came because you asked. That's all I need to know." Margaret took a shaky breath. "I've lived with regret for so long. For the way I raised Ethan, for the way I controlled everything, and for the way I caused your suffering." Lauren squeezed her hand, silently listening. She did not interrupt. Margaret continued. "I wanted loyalty. I wanted devotion. I believed love meant obedience. And I failed to see you as a person, Lauren. I asked you to endure, and I manipulated my son to do the same. I thought I was protecting him. In reality, I destroyed the happiness of both of you." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Lauren's chest tightened, not with anger, but with understanding. This was the moment she had prepared for: acknowledgement, honesty, and finality. "I understand, Margaret," Lauren said softly. "I forgive you, not because it changes what happened, but because I choose to release myself from it. Your mistakes shaped our past, but they will not define my future." Margaret's lips trembled, forming a weak smile. "Thank you, truly. I am so sorry for the pain I caused. I only wish I could undo it." Lauren nodded. "You can't undo the past, but you can be honest in the present. That's enough." Meanwhile, Ethan had been visiting Margaret regularly, helping with care, and listening to her reflections on the past. Slowly, he began to see the full extent of how family dynamics had shaped him and his behavior toward Lauren. These visits were difficult but necessary, forcing him to confront the truths he had long avoided. One afternoon, Ethan sat by Margaret's side. "Mom, I see now what you did," he said quietly. "The lessons you taught me, the loyalty above all else. It almost destroyed my marriage. I've spent weeks untangling it in therapy, in letters, in reflection. I want you to understand the impact." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I see it too, Ethan, and I am sorry, more than words can say." "Apology is not enough," he admitted. "But acknowledgement is a start, and I'm working to be a better man, so I don't repeat the same mistakes." Margaret nodded slowly. "That is all I could hope for. That is all I could wish for you, and for Lauren." Lauren visited a few days later, sitting quietly in Margaret's room while Ethan tended to minor tasks. No words were rushed, no emotions forced. The three of them sat in a tentative, careful silence, each processing, each acknowledging, each forgiving in their own way. When Lauren finally spoke, her voice was calm and deliberate. "Margaret, Ethan and we've come to understand our past. Your actions shaped us, but we are not bound by them anymore. The truth has power only if it controls us. Otherwise, it frees us." Margaret's eyes softened. "I'm glad that you have survived it all, Lauren, that you have taken back your life." "Yes," Lauren said softly. "I have, and I will continue to live it fully." The days that followed were peaceful. Margaret's final weeks were filled with reflection, care, and honest conversations she had long avoided. Ethan continued to learn and grow, shaping himself into someone capable of empathy, awareness, and respect. Lauren continued to flourish independently, her life richer, her purpose stronger, and her spirit fully claimed. Outside the walls of the nursing home, news of Lauren's courage quietly spread through her community. People began to see her not just as a survivor, but as a woman who reclaimed her voice, her independence, and her life. The stories of past pain, manipulation, and endurance became lessons for others, a testament to the strength found in choosing oneself. By the end of Part 8, the family had achieved a measure of reconciliation, not in returning to what was broken, but in understanding, acknowledgement, and the creation of healthier boundaries. Lauren, Ethan, and even Margaret had faced truths long hidden, and while healing was ongoing, the path forward was clearer and more honest than it had ever been. The months after Margaret's passing were quiet but profound. Lauren had settled fully into her life, her apartment now a sanctuary of peace and independence. The sunlight filled every corner, her sewing projects hummed with life, and the evenings were spent reading or volunteering at the Women's Center she had grown to love. Every day was a reminder that she had chosen herself, and that choice had saved her in more ways than one. Ethan, too, had changed. Therapy had taught him lessons he could not have learned any other way, and the letters from his father had opened his eyes to the toxic patterns he had inherited. He had become more self-aware, empathetic, and present, not just in theory, but in practice. He had learned that love required balance, honesty, and respect, not obedience and silence. One evening, Ethan visited Lauren's apartment. There was no agenda, no expectations, only a desire to speak honestly. Lauren greeted him calmly, not with hesitation or fear, but with the assurance of a woman who knew her worth. "I wanted to come by," Ethan began, his voice steady, "to thank you for leaving, for surviving, for showing me what it means to truly choose yourself." Lauren smiled softly. "You've learned a lot, Ethan. I see that, and I hope you continue. But our paths, they are separate now. That is where the healing lies." He nodded. "I understand, and I'm grateful. For closure, for lessons, for the chance to be better. I won't ask for more than that." For a long moment, they sat together in quiet reflection, acknowledging the past without being trapped by it. The years of silence, neglect, and pain had shaped them, but they did not define the future. In the following months, Lauren's life blossomed. She expanded her sewing business, began teaching workshops for young women, and started sharing her story publicly, not as a tale of victimhood, but as one of empowerment and survival. At a small women's conference, she stood on stage, speaking with calm authority. "Love that asks you to disappear is not love. Family that costs you your life is not loyalty. Sometimes walking away is not failure. It is survival." The audience listened in silence, some nodding, others with tears in their eyes. Lauren's story had become a beacon for those who felt trapped, unheard, or invisible in their own lives. Ethan continued his path of transformation as well. He rebuilt relationships cautiously, focused on empathy, and worked to dismantle the lessons of control and blind loyalty that had haunted him for decades. Though he and Lauren would never return to the life they had shared, their reconciliation was one of mutual respect and understanding. Years later, Lauren received a simple message from Ethan. "I have finally learned what it means to truly love and respect someone. Thank you for showing me the way, even through the pain." She smiled, replying simply, "You're welcome. And I hope you continue to live with that understanding." Lauren never remarried, and she did not feel incomplete. Her happiness was not dependent on another person, but on the life she had claimed for herself. She laughed freely, loved deeply in her friendships and work, and moved through life with purpose. She had walked away at the right moment, not too early, not too late, but exactly when she needed to. The truth that had once threatened to destroy everything, the hidden past of Ethan's father, Margaret's manipulations, the silence and neglect, had been faced. It had changed them, shaped them, and ultimately freed them. And Lauren, who had once been invisible in her own home, now shone brightly in her own life. She had left not out of hate, not out of weakness, but out of courage. And in doing so, she had rewritten the meaning of survival, love, and self-respect forever. Thank you for reading this story. Lauren S. journey reminds us that true courage is not always loud. It is in the quiet moments when we choose ourselves over fear, when we reclaim our voice, and when we step into the life we deserve. Sometimes love asks us to endure, but survival asks us to walk away. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on your own life, your choices, and the power you have to create your own happiness. Remember, choosing yourself is never selfish. It is the first step toward freedom, healing, and a future full of hope. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting story videos.